They all took their different career paths. They're very successful in what they do. So I don't at all say that, university is the only way to be successful in what you do. It's a different path for everyone, and what they want to do and how they want to achieve success is entirely up to them. So, so it was really interesting. So it's around recognizing those things and that self-empowerment that can be so much more powerful than just having a program where you just get told, well, actually, have you thought about doing it this way instead of that way instead? If we spent more time nurturing the younger generation to be able to be self-empowered and coach themselves, they can then pass on those to the next generation as well. So I think
powerful.
That's where...
So powerful. It reminds me of the expression where if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you give him a fishing rod, and he's fed for life. And
for me, when I reflect on that, I think the biggest thing always has been around the networking element. There was almost like this expectation culturally, I think, perhaps, or traditionally, for me to just do what I need to do at university, then go home and do what else is needed, like carry on doing my work in X, Y, Z. So there was never really that kind of push for me to think that I need to actually network and stuff. It was more kind of like, yes, I'm British born, but actually my cultural heritage is still being Indian, and still being, true to my values of that there are certain things that have to be done. I'm not saying I went home and started doing cooking and cleaning or anything, right? Not stereotyping, that's not what used to happen.
It's International Women's Day, come on,
No, it's not what used to happen at all.
STEMinism, the Equity in STEM podcast, sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry, where we hold conversations about race representation in STEM with the greatest minds in industry and academia. Hello and welcome to STEMinism, the Equity in STEM podcast, where we hold engaging conversations about race representation in science,
technology,
engineering,
and mathematics.
My name is Ali Saad.
And I'm Clive Sower.
And we are sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry. How about that?
Yeah, we managed to miraculously leave that out in the first couple of episodes, but we wanted to make sure we included it in this one. And today we're shooting on International Women's Day, so this is probably going to come to you a bit later, but today we are here with a Kingston legend, It's an honour and privilege to be here with someone that's spent over 20 years at Kingston University, starting off with a bachelor's degree in pharmaceutical science, transitioning to a PhD, and that's only half the story. Since then, she's been promoted to associate professor and is now also the head of department for chemistry and pharmaceutical sciences. We're not done yet.
Not done yet.
She's also the race and equality co-chair at Kingston University and the Advanced HE Race Equality Charter Chair as well as being a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry.
2 chairs, 2 charters. How about it?
And so, as mentioned, it's an honour, it's a privilege to be back at Kingston University, our old stomping ground, celebrating International Women's Day with none other than Dr. Bao. How are you doing today? It's a pleasure to have
Very
you here.
good. Very excited that you're both back here, as you said, on your old stomping ground, but also International Women's Day, right?
What a day. What a
day to be here.
What a day to be here, absolutely. Really glad to be here. Thanks for making the time, and maybe we should just get straight into it. So we always like to start these podcasts with sort of understanding what gives people their mission and what gives the people their purpose in what they're trying to do with that outlook. So I feel like it's always valuable to start right at the beginning, really. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, maybe a little bit about the family dynamics that you grew up in, and how that's shaped you?
Brilliant. So my upbringing is very much sort of, my parents were first generation, I'm first generation born here, but my parents moved to this country from India. Gosh, I'm trying to think now how many years now. Too many years to remember, right? But I'm one of 4. So I have an older brother, a younger brother and a younger sister as well. And interestingly, my parents didn't experience higher education in this country, and they didn't probably experience any sort of, other than sort of the school education that's needed from their country back in India, they didn't experience much in the educational system here. So it was interesting navigating through, going through education here with parents not having as much of an understanding because they were here, and we had a support network around us of a family that were here already previously. But interestingly, I'm also just, as I am one of four, but I'm the only one in my family that went to university as well.
Oh, wow.
So it has its own interesting challenges, because talking to my siblings, sometimes you think, oh, great, you're one of four, right? You could talk to your brothers and sisters about challenges of university and, all those sort of things when you were thinking about higher education. But actually, I wasn't able to really. They all took their different career paths. They're very successful in what they do. So I don't at all say that, university is the only way to be successful in what you do. It's a different path for everyone, and what they want to do and how they want to achieve success is entirely up to them. So, so it was really interesting. So going through sort of primary school, being in the area that I was, we went to our local little primary school, which was literally down the road, because it was the easiest for my parents to get to juggle between their jobs and stuff. I look back now and I think about the determination that both my parents had of coming into this country and literally starting from scratch. Yes, they had some family support, but they started from scratch in the sense of they still, to this day, tell us the story of how they used their own bare hands and took away the chimney breast and everything. And it's like, right, there's builders for that now. So it's great that they can do that, and it's a great skill to have, but it makes you think, gosh, I wish I'd picked up that skill. I wouldn't be forking out so much for builders now, right?
Exactly.
But it was that, it was that hard work and determination from their side that really instilled into myself and my siblings as well, that to get to somewhere so that no one can take away from you where you've got to. Hard work is the key thing to it. They juggled many jobs at the same time. I remember Mum used to work 3 jobs at one time, just to kind of like get everything through, but also to make sure that she was also showing herself as a role model to us as well. I don't think she intentionally was doing it, but I could see myself that, gosh, this is a really powerful, impactful woman that's doing all this stuff, just to try and get us through a system that they are not familiar with, right? It was interesting. And I had cousins and, that were also living local to us, some a bit further away. And they also were considering university and higher education at the same time as I was. So they became the sort of people that I spoke to about higher education and going into university and things like that as well. Other than that, it was probably in my school that we had role models of, what higher education could look like after you finish primary school and secondary school and so forth as well. So it was an interesting, I think, pathway for me to going into higher education, considering that I had no one around me to kind of push me through. Have you thought about university? No one was, sort of saying those sort of things. If anything, it was like coming home from my GCSE results, showing them to my parents. They were like, that's really good. But it's almost like, okay, how do you think I compared to your benchmark? But because they weren't very familiar with the educational system here, so you navigate it yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you're the first middle child we've had on the podcast. We've had some who were firstborns and have spoken about their trials and tribulations. We've had some lastborns who have spoken about their trials and tribulations, and some who have had kind of their whole families go to university. So it's really interesting to hear that dynamic of dealing with the challenges of not only moving to a new country, but also finding role models and people that you could tap into. I think you've also touched on hard work and determination, which came from kind of seeing what your mum had done, and big up to mum on International Mum's Day as well.
Yep.
Were there any other fundamental life lessons you learned early in your upbringing that have kind of stayed with you?
I think when I look back now and I reflect on the job that I'm doing right now at the moment as being a head of department, there are sort of similarities that I see start following through in terms of, being a woman of an ethnic minority, you suddenly get seen as a role model for others. You sometimes don't think of that. And it made me think back to my childhood when, being the middle child, the only one that went to university, how much my siblings kind of looked up to me and kind of said, we've got this and we're thinking about this, X, Y, Z. And there was this perception of, oh, yeah, she's a university one, so she knows the answers, right? But you think, well, I'm also facing those challenges. Like, who do I turn and talk to, right? So you're filled with all those kind of internal things that you're thinking about at the same time trying to be putting the face on like, yes, I know the answer to this. Of course I know the answer to this. I went to university, right? But yeah, it was interesting. So I think those sort of things are now coming back to me, thinking about them, that I'm now in a position which is considered as a leadership position, right? And so now you have got others that are still looking up to you in different spaces now, be it students, be it colleagues, be it others from different areas that, there is a woman of an ethnic minority who is in leadership position. So if she can do it, we can do it as well. So yeah, you sometimes get those, pressures, if you want to call them pressures, or those things that are resting on your shoulders as well, to think about that's what you have to keep in mind as well.
You got that role model experience from a very early age. It's I'm so much more used to hearing the dynamic of parents being like, education is everything. Without an education, you're going to fall off. You're never going to make it. So yeah, interesting dynamic for sure. And it sounds like you found your own way. And I think just the value of hard graft is enough to essentially push you through life. So really cool. So Kingston
Yes.
University. You've been here a few years.
Yep.
You've been here a few years.
Literally probably part of the furniture now, right?
So, you did your BSc here in
Yes.
pharmaceutical science?
Yep, that's correct.
And your doctorate was more in material science.
Yep.
And we'll come to that in a minute. But what's kept you at Kingston all these years?
I think it's the environment and the fact that it has this ability to be able to keep you here and keep nurturing you. So you don't feel that, you've come to a point where I can't achieve anymore now, actually. You do constantly feel that there's ways in which you can contribute to things, but also not just within the university, it's that ability to make you feel like you are an agent of someone that can actually go outside and influence things as well. So yeah, it's giving you that headspace and that time. But Kingston, I think, is really, really well known in the work that it does around kind of inclusive curriculum, all those sort of things. And so those are things that really I'm passionate about, really chime to my own personal, kind of things that I'm really passionate and involved in. And that I think those are some of the things. And also the people that we work with as well. They constantly, I'm amazed by some of the achievements that individuals have as well. And students, I mean, seeing you two here, right?
Who would have thought, eh?
From a time when I, taught you and seeing massive achievements like this. We had an alumni who came back and spoke to our pharmaceutical science students. And again, it was another alumni who was a black male student who came back and I thought, oh my gosh, you were my first set of students I ever taught, this alumni that came back. I thought, gosh, seeing things like that, it really makes you kind of have that moment where you think, gosh, you must be doing something right if, there's these successful now new students coming through the next generation, the next pipeline. And I think that's what I'm really passionate about, that pipeline.
Definitely left a mark on us. What can I say?
100%. And I think you've touched on some things, especially really interesting as well, around your thought process. Can you tell us a bit about how you went from maybe the technical focus from pharmaceutical science in your undergrad to your postdoc or your doctorate degree in material science? And maybe just tell us a bit about the technical side of your research and what led you down that route.
So when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I kid you not, I think when you're doing your degree, you kind of just have that focus of, okay, this is a 3-year program. I just want to get it done and get out of here and, work out what I want to do, get a job and just get paid, right? So it was interesting. Doing a PhD was never something at the forefront of my mind at that point. It was only when I started doing my final year project, I suddenly thought, actually, do you know what? Research is something that's really interesting because there is this element of an unknown and this element of you being able to test and push a hypothesis, essentially, or something that you don't even know is a hypothesis, or something that is completely unknown. And the fact that it comes up with answers that you don't expect and that whole inquisitive nature. So I think I'm a really inquisitive person and I like to be creative. I know you think creativity and science, how do the two go together? Well, they do actually, because you can be creative in how you solve problems and stuff. So I didn't think at that point I wanted to do a PhD until I did my final year project. And I thought, do you know what, PhD is not something that's, it's something that I would actually like to do. So I started looking around for PhDs and stuff and had a couple of interviews at other institutes and thought, do you know what, I did get offered positions at other institutes, but I thought, I don't know if I want to move away from something I'm so familiar with, where I feel comfortable and I belong. And that belonging feeling for me was really important, which is why I decided to stay at Kingston to do my PhD then, essentially. And the PhD, the technical skills that I gained in my undergraduate was more around the analytical aspects that inspired me to try to get involved in a PhD that was more analytical and materials focused. So kind of those technical skills, moving on to my PhD, were involving looking at medical implants and materials in the eyes, and how can we improve them in such a way that they are more beneficial for individuals, but with a keen eye focusing in on no pun intended, because it
I
was,
was gonna say.
right, because it was to do with, I was working on materials on intraocular lenses, and it was working on how do we get materials that are used in developing countries to be much better, because, and not because there's some materials that are only affordable by developing countries. So how can we get them in such a way that they don't have complications, and that they are long-standing in the eye and so forth. So that's, so those technical skills came into that, modifying materials that are used in intraocular lenses, and also touching on contact lenses as well. And then using analytical skills to be able to test the sort of things that I'd put in place around that, new surfaces and coatings and techniques.
Very interesting. I'm doing a module right now in advanced biomaterials, and we're getting quite into some of the materials used in ocular repair. So very interesting.
Fascinating,
very interesting.
isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into that at some point in the future. But so what actually led you to pursuing a career as an academic? Because there's like the enjoyment of creativity and research, and then there's like teaching. Is there like any particular thing that took you from PhD to I want to now become a lecturer, I want to establish my career, and this for me for you to be your path going forward?
Yeah, so I think the passion really came for going into academia. When I was doing my PhD, we had an opportunity to what's known as kind of demonstrating and do small sessions with students around demonstration of equipment that's being used, some workshops where you go through workshop questions with them. And, at that time, my PhD supervisor was very keen for me to get involved in undergraduate projects that they were involved in, saying, okay, I've got this undergraduate project, this student's working on this area, would you like to kind of like help with what they're doing in the lab and stuff? And it was through that I really thought, do you know what, I really enjoy parting my knowledge onto others, but also it's not just about me telling them what to do, but actually getting them to challenge themselves and actually have that spark of, well, actually, I've never thought about that question, or I've never thought about it that way. So getting them to be more curious as well. And I think that's what really sparked going into academia for me, that I thought that's really what I want to do. Yes, the research element was great as well, that I can actually control my own research and what I want to focus in on, apply for grants and funding. So yeah, it was kind of loads of different things that kind of motivated me to want to get into academia from that.
I think there's like quite a common theme with curiosity and teaching, and even in some of the guests that we've interviewed already, curiosity seems to be something that comes up a lot in STEM as well. And I think maybe it's not so commonly associated with STEM, which is strange to me.
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of those stereotypes. Going back to the stereotypes, you think of science as the Dexter's lab with the broken glasses, and you're in the lab looking at specimens, when actually a lot of the solutions required, you have to be quite creative to come up with them and think outside the box. So I think that's that. And I think as science has developed as well, if you're looking for new innovations, you're going to have to do what's not been done before as well. So I think that's a really key point to touch on as well. Maybe if we rewind back a bit and we go back to the time when you were 18 to 21 years old, if you were looking back at yourself, what advice would you give yourself in terms of that early career development, transitioning into academia or transitioning into industry, and maybe looking at how you made some of those decisions as well?
It's a sort of common thing that sometimes you get asked when you do sort of things like interviews and stuff, what advice would you give your younger self? And I think for me, when I reflect on that, I think the biggest thing always has been around the networking element. I think when I was younger, being one of four, but the only one going to university, of having this kind of, almost going to university and having this going in, kind of being in for a 9 o'clock lecture, sometimes not getting home until 7, 8 o'clock, because I used to commute to university, right? There was very limited opportunities for me to be able to think, okay, do you know what? Everybody's going to the SU to do X, Y, Z. There was almost like this expectation culturally, I think, perhaps, or traditionally, for me to just do what I need to do at university, then go home and do what else is needed, like carry on doing my work in X, Y, Z. So there was never really that kind of push for me to think that I need to actually network and stuff. It was more kind of like, yes, I'm British born, but actually my cultural heritage is still being Indian, and still being, true to my values of that there are certain things that have to be done. I'm not saying I went home and started doing cooking and cleaning or anything, right? Not stereotyping. That's not what used to happen.
It's International Women's Day. Come on,
it's not
Val.
what used to happen at all. It was more a case of I used to just be like, parents were like, make sure you just come back and get on with your work, get everything you need to done because on the weekends you've got this coming up, that coming up, a wedding, a function, or whatever. So I was always mindful that I wanted to get my work assignments and stuff done straight away as soon as I had them and, go home and do them, which meant opportunities to network were very limited. But now looking back, and I think that actually what we have on offer now for students and for the 18 to 21-year-olds now is so much more than what used to be on offer before, right? Now you've got people like the RSC, you've got so many other societies, got so many other events going on that if I honestly think back now, I don't think they were so common or even known of then. And I think that had they been, you think, oh my God, if I had taken part in them then and I had, I would have had much more of a kickstart in my career, right?
Love what you just said there. We literally started Banter STEM exactly for what you just said.
I know, it's just crazy. You look back and I think, oh my gosh, where was all this stuff when we were, making decisions for university and I'm sure they were there, but it's just more a case of the fact that I think it was a lot more of an influence of what was happening in your immediate family environment then. And if what was happening in your immediate family environment wasn't orientated around somebody else being a role model that went to university, you were just looking at role models that were in schools.
Exactly.
And in those schools, if you weren't seeing people that looked like you or had, similarities of wanting to go into a STEM subject or go into a science, chemistry subject, then it was difficult, I think. So, completely hats off to societies that are doing all this stuff now because it's really well needed, especially for nowadays for youngsters to try to understand that actually you can go and do a career in chemistry, you can study chemistry at university, but actually that doesn't limit you to just becoming a chemist afterwards. Actually, you end up with a pathway that you dictate how you want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that hit home on so many levels. I thought you can't be what you can't see, which is really, really important. And I've got to shout out anyone who was doing that work back when we were at university, and also to those groups who are doing it now. For example, Elevate, shout out Elevate, who had that equitable aspect to it as well. So, they're targeting specifically Black students, which is really, really great to see. And I know that I would have benefited from that when I was at Kingston. So, let's, do you want to?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll add to that as well is maybe culturally as well, or maybe historically, the academic side was really heavily emphasized. You've got to get A stars, you've got to get a first degree. But if you say, you're going to a networking event, maybe you're saying, that's just a social event.
Hanging out.
You're out for a jolly on the Friday night.
It's an add-on.
Exactly. When actually, as you reflected on, those things are really important. So maybe just one for the parents. If your children are going out to do things socially, encourage them, as long as it's for good things like the Royal Society of Chemistry.
It's safe to say
get them involved.
The last 2-3 jobs maybe that I've had, and definitely some of the ones that you've had, have all been through our network. So network can arguably there you go. Network is your net worth. Can directly translate to success and opportunities. But let's stay on the topic of demographics because it is the STEMinism podcast after all, and this is what we're here to talk about. So, what was your experience like when you were at Kingston? Because when we were here in 2014, super multicultural, people from all different places, very high number of international students. I can't fully speak to the staff demographic, but I feel like maybe not loads of Black, brown, let's say non-white staff. But what was your experience first as a student, and then maybe more so as a member of staff?
So I think back when I was a student, perhaps the demographic wasn't, in terms of the student demographic, it was very diverse. The pharmaceutical science degree, I remember, was probably one of the most diverse degrees. And I'm proud to say that hasn't changed too much. It's still diverse. And I think it's due to that fact that there is a large demographic when you talk to the students that are very interested in, their impact that they could have on society through other means other than just the traditional routes. Right? Because I think we need to try and move away from this concept of that if you want to have an impact on society, it has to be through these main disciplines that are normally the ones that, if I think back now to when I was having conversations with my parents about, I want to go to university, it was much more of a case of like, okay, so what's that going to lead to type thing. And actually nowadays, if you do a degree in pharmaceutical science, you do a degree in chemistry or something, it's so much more varied as well. You can go into so many different things, which I think just keeps the inquisitive nature and the curiosity buzzing all the time. So kind of reflecting back on the student demographic was very, very diverse, still is now, very proud of that as well. And I think it's the same for the staff demographic, maybe of not being so diverse now. I mean, I look at my team now, we are definitely diverse. I think there are diversities there, but there obviously, with everything like that, there is still work to do. If there wasn't work to do, we wouldn't be sitting there having this conversation, right?
Exactly. And I think just touching off of the back of that diversity, rewinding back to, I think it was 2014, 2013, when we were students, having you as one of our lecturers was a major inspiration. Starting off, you could have blended in with us as one of the students, and that in itself it removed so many barriers, because we could see you, we still had that respect for you as a lecturer and as someone that was teaching us, but there was still that level of banter, that level of interaction, and you could relate to some of the things that we were saying as well. So it was really powerful to have a young Asian woman leading, lecturing us at the time, and as you said, showing us the possibilities. And I think, as you said, things have continued in that vein, which is really good. What have been the challenges that you've seen, kind of starting off as a lecturer, now probably managing many of the people that you came in and were managing you at the time? How did you deal with those challenges?
I think the challenges mainly exist around probably my own self-perceptions of what I think people see me as opposed to challenges that individuals are creating for me. I think a lot of it comes through, and I'm sure you've touched upon it in other podcasts, imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome, but also aspects of, and I've learned a very valuable thing over time through those challenges. We always go on about networking, go out and network, make sure you meet people. But actually my new kind of way of seeing things is networking with intent. And not just going to somewhere where you think, I'm just here, my face is here, people know who I am. Actually, there should be an intention behind why you're there as well. But for me, the challenge of, kind of now is more around the time factor. There's so much I want to do and there's so much I want to get involved in. I just don't have the time to, unfortunately. So I'm buzzing with that same energy still, that curiosity, inquisitive nature, but I just don't have the time. And that's where I think I have to really draw in on colleagues and get them on board to become allies and get them involved in some of the initiatives and projects that are up here for me, but I just don't have the time to do, unfortunately. So yeah, I think those probably are more the challenges. I think I create the challenges myself rather than the challenges being created for me, essentially.
Interesting. Yeah. Imposter syndrome is I've said this before, it's not a syndrome. I think we're all affected by it to some degree, but maybe some people are better at managing it, not making it appear so outwardly. But I think we all suffer from it to some extent.
Yeah, I think it's to several extents as well, because obviously you think of ethnicity, you think of gender. But for me, I mean, I took up this head of department position after I came back from maternity leave, right? And you think, oh my gosh, like she's got a kid. And, at the time I used to think, what am I doing? I've got kids. I'm going to be juggling so many things. But actually, after coming back from maternity, I came back with a new lease of new energy of there's so much more I want to do than just be seen as someone who's come back from maternity leave.
I think you've had 2 promotions since then.
Yeah, I've changed quite a lot. Yeah, right.
You came in
it
with
gave me a bit of a kick,
energy,
probably, right?
Yeah, and I think again, big up to all the mums. I think we've got partners who have had babies as well, and it's not easy managing both the working world and the family world and
the perceptions of just being a mother.
But also the challenges that come with it as well.
Yeah.
In my culture, it's very much seen as being an Asian woman who's a mum. There are certain expectations culturally that they may say that you should be expected to be the one that is not constantly working full time, and all those things that you have to navigate as well. But I think you just have to think that they are internal things that you're creating yourself, and actually no one's there to judge and no one's there to say anything. Yes, they might be thinking it and saying it, but you have to believe in yourself enough to know when to push back with what others may be thinking, and just think sometimes I actually don't really care what you think.
True.
So maybe can you speak to like the power of seeing people who look like you, who sort of come from your background and who have maybe gone through challenges like maybe having a baby and then coming back into the working world? Like, is seeing people who look like you and who you relate to, is that everything to keep people striving to move forward, or is there more to it? I'm thinking about barriers. Like, if there are enough people in senior leadership positions, should that be enough to motivate the next generation?
I think that, it is about seeing individuals that you can see yourself in, but I think more importantly, alongside that, it's about having allies that have the understanding of, in this process, the challenges that are faced through those, it's not a victim mentality. We are not victims here. It's just a structural system thing that's happened, right? And been created. And it's having those allies that understand that actually, maybe I shouldn't be asking her, oh, are you going to be okay doing that because you've got a, young one at home? Because that's just going to feed an imposter syndrome, right? And actually, it's just the way in which you use that language instead. Like, is there anything else I can help and support you with instead? Rather than,
And you wouldn't ask the dad that either, would you? So.
Yeah, it's true.
Exactly.
No one's asked me that my whole life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I think, allyship is probably a really, really big thing, but it has to be allyship that are true allies, that are willing to stand up when things do happen that shouldn't be happening. Not just like, oh, I'm an ally, but actually not fully following through being an ally. And I think it's not just about me seeing other Asian women mothers. For me, it is about actually seeing other ethnic minority women in general. Because we all, when you think about intersectionality and you think of other things as well, we all have different challenges and we all have different, experiences that we've had. But the key thing is that we're all trying to find ways to overcome them so that others don't experience them as well. And I think that's probably what's most important to kind of think about and always remember as well.
So powerful. The importance of allyship, but also meaningful allies and not just tick box allies as sometimes you see. And I think that's a really key theme. Would you say it's similar for mentorship? Have you had any mentors personally that have helped you navigate some of these challenges? I know you've been involved in numerous mentoring programs. What are the pros and cons you've seen across and maybe personally as well?
I think mentorship is absolutely fantastic if it's a kind of a two-way street. So mentorship has to be something that's not necessarily where just the mentee is going to gain something, but actually if you do mentorship and actually the mentor is going to gain something as well, an insight into, as we said, like challenges and difficulties that the individual mentee might be facing. So it then broadens their horizon to be an ally as well. So I've had some fantastic mentors, in senior positions as well that have really sort of kind of been sometimes that critical friend voice of when you go up to them and you say, oh, sometimes you think, oh my God, why am I even having this conversation with them? It's such a trivial thing, right? And you go up to them and you say, oh, I'm thinking this, and this is what so-and-so said, and this is how I felt. Sometimes you just need another person who's not from the same demographic as you, or maybe is from the same demographic and just says, well, why do you even care? Why does it matter? And you suddenly think, you have that click moment, you think, actually, why does it matter? But then equally, at the same time, that mentor is now suddenly understanding that maybe that individual, individuals do feel those sort of things and we aren't aware of them. And then it gives them a skill set as well. So I think mentoring like that is really useful, but also reverse mentoring as well. So, that kind of plays into that as well. And I'm a massive advocate of sponsorship as well, not just mentoring. Sponsorship is having that person in a room when you are not in the room. And recognizing that, you have a skill set and actually advocating for you in the right way. And I think, sponsorship can work really well to try to address a lack of, ethnic minorities in leadership positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that there's some companies who have like bonus programs for sponsorship, basically, when you sponsor a new employee into a role. It's quite a nice incentive. They do that at my company, I'm pretty sure. So if you know someone who you think could do the job well, you make a recommendation, and then if they come on board, you both get paid a little bit of a bonus.
Oh, like referrals,
Yeah, exactly. There's many ways of doing it. I'm sometimes in a little bit of mixed modes about mentoring, because we've definitely gotten benefit from mentorship. I'm never going to say that that's not the case. But there is a lot of mentoring programs. They may be like 6 months long. cohort of like, let's say 20, 30 individuals. And I guess what I'm wondering is like, how can we scale it up? Because I feel like the group that benefit from the mentoring program are quite small in relation to the wider academic demographic. So, is there any different approaches we could take? How can we maximize the efficiency of mentoring?
It's a really, really interesting conversation and topic, I think, that, is needed to have, I think, in loads of spaces, because there's only so much time and effort you can put into doing mentorship for it to have fruitful outcomes for a larger audience, right? But I really think that if we were to try to have a larger impact, it would be looking at how do you couple up mentoring with coaching? How do you couple up those that have been mentored, so the mentees now, how do you get them to gain skills in coaching now to then be able to pass on, their knowledge and their skills and their way of navigating systems and structures to another set of individuals? So I think it requires a two-pronged approach. It's not kind of a straightforward, I've been on a mentoring program, so now I know everything. Yes, you've learned, you may have learned to navigate certain things, but mentoring is not just about, kind of having the answers to things. It's about you gaining a new set of ways of problem solving and, those skills, and actually then coupling up with coaching, I think could be really impactful and powerful for those individuals to feel empowered to have conversations with others and to guide them as well.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think sometimes mentorship, coaching, sponsorship, they're all just thrown in one bag, and there's not always clarity. Exactly. And the importance, I think the entry point is probably mentoring, but that's only the first step on the ladder. And it's until you're able to get a coach and you're able to get someone who's going to advocate for you when you're not in the room, which I think is probably the most important. That's where I think the next range of benefits are really going to come. So thank you for sharing that as well. Maybe going back to you as a lecturer and transitioning to a professor and head of department, what are the aims for you in academia? What do you see as being the end game? Where if we come back in 10 years or 15 years time, what does great look like for you?
It's a hard one to answer because I think it's one of those things where you're kind of living in academia, you kind of live on just like kind of the milestones now to get through academic years and, kind of plan things. And I think being in a leadership position, you sometimes get so heavily bogged down in leading teams to achieve outcomes and goals that are linked to strategies and so forth, getting all technical here now, right? And you sometimes forget to look in and reflect on what you see your goals and, where you see yourself going forward as well. So I think for me, ideally, I think at some point, profship would be getting into professorship will be a goal. Where that sits, I'm not quite sure because I'm trying to juggle with having a young one. You'll be starting school soon. So, tying that in with how does that work now with drop-offs and pickups and stuff. But, I'm not complaining because actually those balances that I have to make and those challenges that I have, they make me a stronger individual of how I can lead a team that also might have those things to think about as well. So I think, profship at some point. Whether I decide to stay in academia or not, who knows? I do feel like I do want to have more of an influence over changing policies and changing landscapes. So whether that's a more of a senior leadership position within academia or maybe outside of academia as well, who knows?
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. Not much to comment on it, but I'll lead into the next question, which is, you said professorship sometime, but what I see you spending quite a lot of time in now is sort of inclusion and diversity work, which is really, really powerful and also very, very inspiring. You sit as the Race and Equality Chair at Kingston, and I think also with Advanced T'Chee, the co-chair. What are sort of the aims of those bodies, and what's your capacity as chair or co-chair?
So within the university work that I do, so I sit as I'm one of three. We sit as Race Equality Charter Mark co-chairs. So we're doing the work across the university to collect data and evidence and impact of what's been happening in the university around how is it kind of working with closing the awarding gap, the attainment gap, staff progression, and those sort of things around demographics. So we're working on those, and if there are areas where we can do a bit more than we currently do, how does that look? How does excellent look? What does success look like? So things like the Elevate program that you mentioned before, so that ties in really nicely to some positive action programs that we have going at Kingston. But it also we gather that evidence and that data to see where do we want to be in 3 years' time, in 4 years' time, in 5 years' time as part of our charter mark application. So alongside that, I do sit on, as Advanced HE, I am one of their Race Equality Charter panel chairs, which means I chair some of the panels that take place for other institutes that put forward their applications, and we essentially assess the application on a application by application basis, and we look at the work that they're doing around race equality, essentially, and also taking into account an intersectional lens as well. And I think the nice thing about doing that work with Advanced HE is actually recognising and understanding that it's not a one-size-fits-all. So challenges that are being faced by institutes in one part of London are very different to challenges being faced in universities that are up north, perhaps. You know, the demographic of the local population is very different. So therefore, that could have an impact on the types of staff that work there, the types of staff that don't have opportunities to work there. All those sort of things are factored into race equality charter applications. And it's really nice to see really good success stories that are happening across the whole of the UK of what institutes are doing to try to kind of make it better for race equality as well. So it's a privilege and an honour to be working as a panel chair on those sort of things, because it's nice to see what's going on in other institutes as well and celebrating successes, because I think we sometimes get so bogged down when we're doing race equality work on kind of like the negative challenges that we have. But maybe we should do more about celebrating successes, actually.
I love that. In fact, you've actually answered the next couple of questions I had in my mind is around intersectionality. I think you recently were approved, I think it was over £100,000 as part of the Missing Elements report that was submitted, where we're seeing a lack of diversity in chemistry. I think the Professor Robert made quite a bold statement that the culture of chemistry is racist at the moment, which is quite powerful, but I think is also not new. I think if you've been in academia, if you've been in the industry for a while, you experience a lot of these trials and tribulations. Can you talk to us a bit about your thought process in applying for the fund, successfully getting the application, and then what that money will be used for going forward?
Yeah, so I think the report that came out from the RSC I wouldn't say it was an eye-opener as such. It was interesting to read, and I wouldn't say it's an eye-opener because I think it's something that we knew that exists around that cultural change that needs to take place around, within chemistry itself. Be it considered as, looking at it through an anti-racist lens or whichever lens we decide to look at it through, but there are cultural changes that in the chemical sector need to take place, essentially. I think that's what the report highlighted. So when the call for the grant came out, I thought this is something that's really, really chimes in on a lot of the stuff that I do around race equity, gender equity, but also socioeconomic status, all those sort of things that tie into it as well. And how that intersectional lens is really important to apply, because what one individual experiences as a woman is going to be very different to an experience that a black woman experiences, for example. So that's essentially what inspired me to try to apply for that grant. Alongside that, I've been working with a colleague within this university who's doing a lot of our stuff around sustainable development education, sustainability as well. And I thought, do you know what? Looking at sustainability and sustainable development education through the lens of race equity is a really nice way in which we can actually get chemistry curriculum changed, essentially, or updated. So I'm not saying that, the curriculum as it is, yes, it's fundamental knowledge that we need to know, but actually it's probably the way in which we deliver case studies and approaches to how students see chemistry relating to real world problems that probably needs to be changed and tweaked in such a way that students can actually feel comfortable and confident to have conversations around race equality, gender equality, all those sort of things. So the grant is essentially working with Imperial College and Brighton University. It was a three-way submission that we had, with Kingston being the lead. We'll be essentially surveying students to start with and staff to work out the terminology that's used, essentially. Equity, equality, social justice, diversifying the curriculum. What do all these things mean to individuals? Because if we're using the wrong terminology in the first place, how can we make any sort of impactful change? or how can we make any change? How do we get those that are unengaged on board if they don't feel that they know what anti-racist means? If they don't know what, something like equity versus equality means? So that's essentially what the grant will do. We'll do a survey first, and from the results of the survey, we'll be then creating toolkits for institutes to use to have case studies around the Sustainable Development Goals. So maybe focusing on separate goals, the clean water one maybe, and how do you encourage conversations for students to have around equality, around meeting that sustainable development goal. But equally, it's about upskilling colleagues to feel confident to have conversations as well. So by no means am I saying that things that are happening at the moment are happening wrong. It's just a case of I've slowly seen and realised that actually colleagues that haven't experienced challenges and difficulties, they perhaps don't feel confident enough to have those conversations, or they don't know how to have them without offending. So how do we upskill colleagues and those that are educators to get involved in those sorts of things? That's what the toolkits will do. And then hopefully on the back of those toolkits, they'll get implemented into curriculum and then shared widely with the RSC as well. It's a 3-year project. So, we're on year 1 at the moment still, doing survey collection at the moment. So yeah, let's hope it leads to where it needs to lead, and it will hopefully build a community of educators together. As part of the grant, we'll have a conference where those that are involved in working on these sort of areas and utilising these toolkits, they'll be able to present some of their work to a wider audience as well, so that we can all be change makers essentially.
Really powerful, that point that you made about language. I think language is essentially everything. I mean, I was just thinking, my sister wrote a book called Me and White Supremacy. And one of the main things that she did with that book, I think, is break down a lot of terms that are used in this area of anti-racism, which maybe people didn't fully know how to wrap their heads around. And yeah, it's funny now. I see people come in to explain those terms to me, and I'm like, don't worry, I know well about these terms, but the language is important.
Yeah, because it can make a difference between kind of calling people in and calling people out. And I think we want to try to have a culture where you're nurturing people to be able to call them in to have a conversation with you, rather than feeling that we don't want them to feel that they're being called out. Actually, it's an educational path for everyone. We all entered into academia to become educators, which means we have a desire to want to keep learning as well. And, we have to educate those that haven't had those challenges and those, difficulties. And that is perhaps through the language to start with.
Absolutely. I think we're humans, right? So we love putting things in categories. Speaking of categories, let's say maybe 15, 20 years ago, we had this category of BAME, B-A-M-E, Black and Minority Ethnic. And I feel like this term is probably a bit more outdated, but I still see it bandied about quite a bit. And obviously the experience of black and Asian people are very different to other groups. You could be travelers and be in the minority ethnic group, for example. They're going to have a very different experience. But do you think there are any sort of stigmas in being bundled into a sort of category like BAME?
Very interesting, because I think the term BAME, if you look at the government guidance and stuff, there is sort of an indication of that we should be moving away from using that term, right? But then I think what the difficulty that you end up having is when it comes to reporting mechanisms, how do you report data in such a way that you're not having isolated small numbers that is self-identifiable then essentially? So it's always difficult, and I've realised this more and more now, that in my position where you're doing a lot of metric analysis and stuff, how do you do it in such a way where you're not highlighting, kind of like small numbers of small individuals that are going to be self-identifiable then, but essentially you're making sure that you're able to identify that there are differences that individuals face. I don't think anybody at the moment has really fully cracked it yet, because it's very hard. How do you quantify and discuss and talk about an experience that a black male student may have, or a black male individual may have, against an Asian male or Asian female, without making it look as if they are kind of, very small numbers and small clusters. So it's about, being scientists, we always look at stats as well, right? We can't get away from the fact that, is it statistically significant, right?
Exactly.
People 0.05.
Exactly, yeah. So it's about making sure that we use caution when we're using categories such as BAME as well, with the caveat of understanding that it's a term that's used to kind of bring everybody together. but it can have negative impacts and stigmas, as you said, for those individuals that identify as Asian, but actually they're not Asian, they're Chinese.
Exactly.
And their experiences are very different. So it is hard. And obviously, when you look at the category Black, Black African, Black Caribbean.
Very different as well.
Very different.
Yeah.
Cultural upbringing is so different in those, those particular individuals. So it's hard, but I don't think anybody's cracked it yet. So if anybody has, it'd be nice to know.
That's right. And I think you're right. You've touched on how, from a data perspective, it may be easier to group people, so that I think even when the RSC did the report, Professor Robert Mackay was the only chemistry professor at the time, and he was rounded down to 0 because of anonymization.
Yeah.
If he is identified, everyone would know that it was him.
Yeah.
So how do you draw out, and sometimes it's, how is the data being recorded as well? Is it just people are choosing to put other in so that they don't face any challenges associated with it? So I think it's multi-layered and the approaches are different as well. So yeah, I think going forward, it's definitely going to require a different solution.
Absolutely. But there is some value in targeting individual groups. Like, for example, with Vanta STEM, we're very, very specific in our message. Vanta Black is the darkest color black. We were playing on a bit of a pun. I think it absorbs 99.9997% of light or something like this. And we were sort of taking the equity approach because we feel like right now, Black people will benefit most from our message, given who we are and what we look like and the sort of challenges that we've been through. But we also sometimes feel conflict. Like, for example, when we work with universities, coming in and being like, we want to speak to the Black students only, it can be, let's say, quite difficult to bring that message. Just what are your thoughts about this approach in general? And any comments around equity and targeted approaches to improvement in the inclusion space?
I think targeted approaches definitely are needed in areas where you do have the data that supports that. And I think, definitely we have an Elevate program that is aimed at, sort of Black students. The targeted approach works really well if you've got the data that supports it. That's what the action or the approach that is needed. But then again, within that targeted approach, you have to be mindful, as we said, a Black male versus a Black female, they're going to have very different experiences as well. Hugely different experiences. And also,
Black women always get hit the hardest.
Yeah. And cultural expectations as well, because, a Black Caribbean male is going to have a very different experience from a Black African female, for example. So yeah, I'm all for the targeted approaches because I think if you have the data to back it up, then it's there. But it's about making sure that we get the message out there that it is a targeted approach, which is a positive action because of data that's been highlighted. Yeah. And it's not just because, what's sometimes considered as, a token type thing. It's getting that balance right. And this is why I think the messaging is really important. It's data-driven targeted action.
Well said. Yeah, well said. And I think people are a bit sensitive anyway. So if you don't put it in that backdrop, everyone's like, almost like it's racist to only, you know what I mean? I'm like, hold on. I'm not sure you get how this works.
Yeah, maybe moving on to the next area, which is around employability, which I think starts off, and I think we've had this discussion before. When we started university, we either bought into the narrative or were sold a narrative from somewhere that, once you come out with a degree, you have a job, you walk straight into a job, and then you'll be set for the rest of your life. And we found out very soonly that it's not that easy. Can you talk about how universities are kind of changing their approaches to employability and kind of bridging that gap between the big bad world of academia and entering into industry?
I think it's always going to be a topic for discussion because obviously every student has a different approach or different mindset of what they consider as employability to be. So some students see employability as, I'm going to do my degree, and at the end of it, I'm guaranteed to get a job, right? And actually, doing a degree itself is to give you the skills and the tools to be able to get a job, to be able to get a job.
Keyword.
Right? If we had guaranteed pathways of essentially once you've done your degree, you then will be guaranteed a job in this particular field, then you wouldn't call it a degree of learning, right? I mean, even if you look at like sort of pharmacy, you're still not guaranteed a job at the end of it. You spend so many years doing it. Doctors, you still spend so many years doing it. You still have to apply for a job. So I think the key thing is that with employability, we need to do a lot more, and this is what we're doing at Kingston, focusing on actually how do we get students to be able to recognise how to apply for jobs. How do you sell yourselves? What is your, I'm trying to think of the term that we use now, what is your brand? How do you market yourself? What skills do you put down? And so we're doing a lot with students around creating their own LinkedIn profile and, getting themselves out there and getting them to understand that actually what you think is a small achievement of you having a part-time job I had a part-time job working in the airport, for example. You might think, I'm not going to put that down on my LinkedIn profile. People are going to look at that and think, why did she work in an airport? What has that got to do with what she's studying at the moment? Actually, it's about reframing it and saying the skills that I got from working there was around time management. I did shift work. I was able to do customer interaction.
Tight security.
Yeah, tight security. Do a security check, I'll get it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So those sort of things. So I think it's about making sure that you know that you don't undervalue yourself. And I think this is the message that we are trying to get out to students. And I think lots of universities are doing a fantastic job in this, of making sure that the students see that it's not just about getting the degree. It's not enough alone, just having a degree. How do you then put those skills that you get from the degree in alongside other skills that you gain into a profile to get a job as well? But also linking in with employers to work out what are the skills that you're expecting a job to have when a student comes in. Are you expecting them to have negotiation skills? Are you expecting them to be able to work to a tight time frame, use the technical terms that are needed with working in a lab? So all of those are things that we're doing in a lot of universities, and definitely here at Kingston, since I've taken on the role as head of department, is making sure we have a much tighter link with industry members. At the end of the day, if students are going to get from here, from coming into university to there, to getting a job in industry, be that however it may look, what type of industry they want to go into, but actually what is it that they need to get to there? What are employers looking for? And also educating the employers around the fact that, we have a very diverse student population at Kingston. And actually maybe your company needs diversity because it has different values and opinions and also different ways of problem solving and different ways of doing things. So I always think, and I always say this to students as well, nobody's going to have a seat waiting for you at a table. You have to drag your chair there sometimes. And when you drag your chair there, you're letting other people drag theirs too.
We got a few quotables today, so that's always nice to hear.
100%. Drag your chair to the table. That's how you get there. I love that.
You hit so many things on the head there. I think a lot of students think that it's come to university, go to class, do your exams, leave, find yourself in a job. But, this is such an opportunity to be here. There's so many people who are connected to industry, academia. That point about developing your personal brand, like we did a post about this the other day, like the importance of when there are very fine margins between this candidate and that candidate, what are the things that you've got that are going to get you ahead? And an employer might recognize that you've taken that time to, build up your LinkedIn profile, your professional profile, and worked on your brand. Skill-wise, I feel like the employment world is changing, and definitely so in terms of technology, but everything leads back into science, engineering, and mathematics for that matter. What are some of the skills that you feel like are maybe more relevant to today's, I'm going to go broad and say STEM students, even though that's quite a massive group, that maybe were a bit different? So, as an example, maybe some coding techniques. Like I've recently just learned how to use Python. It took me a while. But what about from your perspective?
Firstly, congratulations for learning coding, right?
Thank you.
It's something that's been on my list to do for a very long time, because you've hit the nail on the head there. Everything in terms of digital technology, digitalization is changing. And I think, looking at a lot of stuff that the RSC is hosting at the moment around digital ways of doing things and how society is going to be impacted with AI. And I think this essentially is where we should be looking to explore the impact that students can have with AI. Students nowadays are much more tech savvy than I used to be, right? And they can probably pick up coding quite quick. I mean, I was absolutely fascinated. The other day I was talking to someone, they were saying, oh yeah, my so-and-so-year-old is doing coding in school. I'm like, what?
Wow.
Like literally when
I was in school,
I think we had like one PC to share between like however many people. That's showing my age now, right? And they're like learning coding and stuff now. I mean, we do a lot of outreach for schools, and yes, we're doing things like, those little Lego things, robots, or whatever they're called. I don't even know what they're called. But they do coding on those. So it's a massive skill to have. And I think that's the way in which society is changing, the digitalization, the AI, but also green skills as well, of, getting to understand that the impact that you will have on the footprint of the world, the universe, but equally, along with that impact comes your ability to be able to negotiate change as well. So can you be that person that goes into a boardroom and says, well, actually, the way that you're doing it is not going to be the correct way that's beneficial for society. It should be done this way because I know that this chemical or XYZ is bad for the environment, for example. So I think there's a lot more that we need to instill in students around those powerful agents of change skills, essentially.
Green skills. I like that one.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to start using that.
Evergreen, yeah. So, final question before we go into a quick fire round. If you had the means in terms of time, money, resource to contribute significantly, I think you're already making significant contributions, but without those limitations, what would your approach be to adopt or to get equity in STEM?
Very interesting question, because you think, okay, where would I put all the money into? I honestly think the money should be put into trying to develop individuals to be able to self-reflect and actually have the skills, so like maybe some funding into coaching perhaps, to make them feel that actually it's not a case of an imposter syndrome always. It's a case of actually taking and harnessing the difficulties and challenges that you face and seeing them in a positive light. And using coaching for those sort of things where they can actually problem solve some of them things themselves, because, it's around recognizing those things and that self-empowerment that can be so much more powerful than just having a program where you just get told, well, actually, have you thought about doing it this way instead of that way instead? If we spent more time nurturing the younger generation to be able to be self-empowered and coach themselves, they can then pass on those to the next generation as well. So I think
powerful.
That's where...
So powerful. It reminds me of the expression where if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you give him a fishing rod, and he's fed for life. And it's almost, rather than giving those fish out for people to solve the short-term problems, you're actually giving them solutions long-term so that when the fish get bigger, you haven't got to get a new rod. You know the process.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is amazing. Thank you so much.
I'll use that one. That's a nice way of putting it, right?
Yeah, you can have it.
Clive is the king of quotables.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's no doubt about it. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. This has been incredibly insightful. I've definitely learned a lot, and it's always a pleasure sitting down with you and getting a chance to catch up. Before we wrap up, we are getting a little bit tight for time, but we're just going to run through a couple of quick fire questions. Is that all right? So just to calm it down. We've gone deep. We've treaded the waters of race representation. Let's just take it down again a notch. So, favorite food?
Pizza.
Yeah, straight up.
Can't go wrong. Next one, in terms of music, do you have a favorite genre or song or artist? What gets you going?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one, that is. Because I don't really know. I'm really bad. I'm rubbish with music. I don't know the genres as such. But, artists like Stormzy, those sort of things I like. But I wouldn't say, I don't know what genre it comes under. You ask the youngster, they'll be able to tell me, right?
Stormzy's a funny one as well. So one person might say grime, the other person might say pop.
so many genres as well, doesn't he? Yeah.
I don't know the genre it comes under, so... and in between Peppa Pig, because of my son, right?
Naturally. Oh, God, yeah. Can't escape it.
Yeah.
Any quotes that you found to be very memorable? Any quotes that you repeat or things that have influenced you?
Oh, gosh, that's a really hard one.
Yeah, it is really hard. Could be an expression, could be a verse, could be, any kind of sentence. If not, just pass.
I mean, the one thing that I always say to myself is that I don't take no for an answer.
I love that. That's a great one.
Absolutely.
That's a great one, yeah. Next, we have favorite hobby, pastime, or activity.
Oh, gosh, if you'd asked me this like 15, 20 years ago, it would have been different. It would have been hockey back then. I used to be a massive hockey player, and got selected to play for my local county. Didn't actually carry on doing it though because of going into higher education and stuff. But anyway, another story for another day. But yeah, at the moment now, I think it's pastime. I don't know, actually. Probably.
Feeding your child.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think that's probably...
Whatever they want to do.
Actually, no, I think in terms of a hobby, I think for me, it's just about spending time with my little one. Because
Yeah.
I think, because I do work so much, any time that I do get like weekends and evenings and stuff, I mean, he's half asleep by the time we get home anyway, because it's so late. But weekends is just about him and me switching off, because I have to find the right balance. You know, at the end of the day, your day job is your day job, and it'll still be there when I get back on
That's
Monday.
right.
Very important lesson. Very important lesson. Take that one to heart. Any like celebrities, icons, heroes?
Oh gosh, that's even an harder one. I don't know. I think I have to pass for that
That's
one.
all right, yeah. If you could be anywhere in the world right now, dream location, we got the private jet on the highway ready to go. Where would you go?
There's many places that I haven't been, so it probably starts off very easy that way, actually. I've always wanted to go to America. Don't ask me which part, because for me, America's quite big, so anywhere in America would be nice.
Good place to start. You could do a road trip. What's your least favorite STEM subject?
My least favourite STEM subject, oh God, probably has to be physics.
All the chemists say physics. All the chemists say physics.
Biggest pet peeve, what really grinds your gears?
Gets in your nerves a little bit. Rose you up the wrong way.
As in work or just in
Anything,
general?
work, life, anything, yeah.
I hate moaning. I hate a moaning culture.
Yeah.
I hate this culture of like, we're just going to keep moaning about it, hoping that something happens. Actually, nothing's going to happen if you keep moaning about it. Just do something to change it, right?
Love that. Any fears or phobias?
No, I don't think I do, actually. I can't swim, so I do have a bit of a fear that if I get stuck somewhere in water, no one's going to save me.
Stay away from the ship's rail if you happen to be on a cruise.
So, one before. What animal best represents you if you had to pick one? Is there any that come to mind?
Very hard one, actually.
Or do you want to switch for what is your proudest achievement? Is that any easier?
My proudest achievement. I think my proudest achievement probably is, I don't know, to be too cliche, but probably my son, I think.
No, that's beautiful.
And I aspire to try to make him, understand, being an Asian woman, and also then passing that on to, those that he's surrounded by as well. So
I think we need to spend a lot of time teaching our young boys, and having like a mother like you is I'm sure going to be incredibly inspirational and learning for them. So yeah, I think we're wrapped.
We are wrapped.
This has been a wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Very insightful. One thing that we love to do at VantaSTEM is kind of give people their flowers whilst they're still here and show that appreciation. So we'd like to give you special. Whoops! Don't break the mic. Lovely orchid here. Special gift. Just to say thank you and some flowers for you. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much. And it's been great having you back. Honestly, it's a major achievement every time. I mean, achievement, as we'll talk about achievements, but every time I do talk to the other academics that taught you, we all say, "Gosh, you guys have come so far," and we still remember from when we taught you. So it's amazing for us as well. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Carry on doing what you're doing. Break those walls.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got to knock down them barriers.
Yep.
So to all of our listeners, it's been a pleasure, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. Until next time.
Peace and many blessings. Thank you.
Stay blessed.